I need to tell you something that Washington doesn't want to admit. The great economic competition of the 21st century, it's over. Not over as in China is ahead, over as in China has already achieved positions that cannot be reversed. The strategic moves were made years ago, the advantages are locked in. The United States is fighting yesterday's war while China is already consolidating tomorrow's victory. This isn't about GDP comparisons or military budgets or who has more aircraft carriers. That's the old game, the game America still thinks it's playing. The new game is about supply chains, about critical materials, about infrastructure, about debt, about the physical foundations of the global economy. In that game, China won while America was distracted. Today, I'm going to show you the 5 domains where China has achieved strategic checkmate, not might win someday, has already won. Positions so dominant that reversing them would take decades and trillions of dollars, if it's possible at all. By the end, you'll understand why the tariffs and the rhetoric and the great power competition talk is theater. The real competition already happened, and America lost. 1. The manufacturing capture. Let's start with the most fundamental victory, making things. China produces roughly 30% of global manufacturing output. The United States produces about 16%. Those numbers alone don't capture the reality. What matters isn't total output, it's what China makes. China produces 80% of the world's air conditioners, 70% of the world's smartphones, 60% of the world's televisions, 70% of the world's solar panels, 60% of the world's electric vehicle batteries. In category after category, China doesn't just lead, China dominates. But here's what's crucial. These aren't just consumer goods, they're the physical layers of the 21st century economy. The energy transition requires solar panels and batteries. The digital economy requires electronics. The basic functioning of modern life requires Chinese factories. America can design an iPhone. Only China can build 200 million of them per year. This manufacturing dominance took decades to build. It required infrastructure, ports, roads, power plants, supply chains. It required workforce development, hundreds of millions of trained factory workers. It required ecosystem effects. When one factory opens, suppliers cluster nearby, creating advantages that compound over time. Can America rebuild manufacturing? In theory, but consider what that would require. Training millions of workers who don't exist. Building supply chains that take decades to develop. Accepting costs that would make products uncompetitive. Convincing companies to abandon established Chinese operations. The iPhone wasn't made in China because Tim Cook hates America. It was made in China because the entire supply chain, from rare earth processing to component manufacturing to final assembly, exists within a few hundred miles. Replicating that would cost hundreds of billions and take 20 years, by which time China would be further ahead. The manufacturing capture isn't a gap that can be closed, it's a structural reality that shapes everything else. 2. The rare earth stranglehold. Now let's talk about something most people have never heard of, but that determines the fate of nations: rare earth elements. Rare earths are a group of 17 elements with names like neodymium, dysprosium, and terbium. They're essential for modern technology, permanent magnets in electric vehicles, guidance systems in missiles, wind turbines, smartphones, computer hard drives. Without rare earths, none of these work. China controls this market completely. China produces about 60% of rare earth mining output, but mining isn't where the control really lies. China processes about 90% of the world's rare earths. Processing is what turns raw ore into usable materials. Even rare earths mined elsewhere, in Australia or the United States or Africa, are shipped to China for processing because no one else has the facilities. China produces about 90% of rare earth magnets. These are the final products that go into motors and electronics. The entire supply chain, from mine to magnet, runs through China. This didn't happen by accident. It was strategy. In the 1990 seconds, Deng Xiaoping famously said, "The Middle East has oil, China has rare earths." China invested in rare earth processing when no one else would. They accepted the environmental costs. They built the expertise. They drove competitors out of business with low prices. By the time the West realized what had happened, it was too late. The United States has rare earth deposits. It even has a mine, Mountain Pass in California, but the ore from Mountain Pass is shipped to China for processing. America can dig up rare earths. Only China can turn them into something useful. Rebuilding rare earth processing outside China would take a decade minimum. The technical expertise doesn't exist elsewhere. The chemical processing facilities don't exist. The workforce doesn't exist. And rare earths aren't the only critical materials. China dominates processing of lithium, cobalt, nickel, and graphite, everything needed for batteries. China controls 77% of global battery cell production. The energy transition runs through China. There's no alternative supply chain. The West can have clean energy, but only if China allows it. 3. The infrastructure empire. While America debated infrastructure for decades without building it, China built infrastructure across the world. The Belt and Road Initiative, launched in 2013, is the largest infrastructure program in human history. Over 140 countries have signed on. Trillions of dollars in projects, ports, railways, highways, power plants, telecommunications networks. This isn't charity, it's strategic positioning. The ports. Chinese companies now operate or have major stakes in ports on every continent. Piraeus in Greece, Hambantota in Sri Lanka, Gwadar in Pakistan, Djibouti. Numerous ports in Africa and Latin America. Ports are choke points. They're where goods enter and exit economies. Control the ports and you have leverage over trade. The digital infrastructure. Huawei built telecommunications networks across Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. These countries now run on Chinese equipment. Their data flows through Chinese-built systems. When the US tried to ban Huawei, it was already too late for most of the world. The networks were built. Ripping them out would cost billions that these countries don't have. The rail and road links. China has built or is building railway connections from China to Europe through Central Asia, from China to Southeast Asia, from Chinese-built ports to resource-rich interiors in Africa and South America. These links make trade with China easier. They orient economies toward China. They create facts on the ground that diplomacy can't reverse. America's response? Occasional announcements of alternative initiatives that never materialize at scale. The Build Back Better World, the Blue Dot Network, press releases without shovels. China has built. America has talked. 4. The debt leverage. Chinese lending to developing countries has created a web of financial relationships that give Beijing enormous influence. Between 2000 and 2021, China lent over $800 billion to developing countries through its state banks. This makes China the world's largest bilateral creditor, exceeding the World Bank and all Western governments combined. The loans went to infrastructure, mostly. Roads and rails and ports that developing countries couldn't otherwise afford. The terms varied but were often opaque, hidden in contracts that weren't publicly disclosed. Western critics call this debt trap diplomacy. The narrative goes, China lends money for projects that fail, then seizes assets when countries can't repay. Sri Lanka's Hambantota port, handed to a Chinese company on a 99-year lease after Sri Lanka couldn't service its loans, is the poster child. The truth is more nuanced but not less concerning. China hasn't seized many assets. Hambantota is unusual. What China has gained is leverage. When a country owes China billions, it considers Chinese interests in its foreign policy. It votes with China at the UN. It recognizes Beijing over Taipei. It provides access for Chinese companies. It doesn't criticize Chinese human rights practices. This leverage doesn't require asset seizures, it just requires debt. And the debt can't easily be escaped. Restructuring Chinese loans has proven difficult. Beijing negotiates bilaterally, not through international frameworks. It demands continued access and influence as conditions for relief. Zambia defaulted on its debts in 2020. 3 years of negotiations with China followed before any restructuring. Throughout, Chinese interests remained protected, while Western creditors took larger haircuts. The Western alternative? The IMF and World Bank lend with conditions. Governance reforms, fiscal discipline, structural adjustment. These conditions are often unpopular and politically costly. China lends without lectures. You want a port? Here's a loan. No requirements for reform. No condescension about corruption or democracy. For leaders in developing countries, the choice is easy. Take the Chinese money, build something visible before the next election, worry about repayment later. The result: a network of financial dependency that spans continents and gives China leverage that America can't match. 5. The technology ladder. The final victory is the one still in progress but increasingly inevitable: China's ascent up the technology ladder. The traditional narrative says China steals technology and produces cheap copies. This was true in the 1990s and 2000s. It's not true anymore. China now leads in multiple advanced technology sectors. 5G telecommunications. Huawei's 5G equipment is cheaper and often better than Western alternatives. Despite American sanctions, Huawei continues to advance. Chinese companies hold more 5G patents than any other country. Electric vehicles. BYD is now the world's largest EV manufacturer. Chinese EVs are entering European and Asian markets at price points Western manufacturers can't match. The technology is increasingly sophisticated, not just cheap. Batteries. CATL is the world's largest battery manufacturer. Chinese companies dominate the entire battery supply chain, from raw materials to finished cells. Solar and wind. Chinese companies produce the cheapest and often the best renewable energy equipment. The energy transition is built on Chinese technology. High-speed rail. China has more high-speed rail than the rest of the world combined. The technology is now exported, with Chinese companies building systems across Asia and Africa. Shipbuilding. China builds more ships than any other country. This includes commercial vessels and an increasingly sophisticated naval fleet. In sector after sector, China has moved from copycat to competitor to leader. The American response has been to restrict technology exports. Semiconductor sanctions are supposed to slow Chinese advancement in chips. Export controls limit access to advanced manufacturing equipment, but these restrictions may be too late. China is investing massively in domestic semiconductor production. Progress is visible, even if challenges remain. Huawei's latest phones include domestically produced chips that shouldn't have been possible under sanctions. And restrictions create incentives. China now knows it cannot rely on American technology. The entire state apparatus is focused on achieving self-sufficiency in semiconductors and other critical technologies. The sanctions might slow China by a few years, they won't stop the trajectory. 6. The game America is playing. Why doesn't America see that it's already lost? Because America is measuring the wrong things. GDP. America's GDP is still larger than China's at market exchange rates. But GDP measures activity, not capability. Producing a $100 billion blockbuster movie and producing $100 billion worth of semiconductors both count the same toward GDP. Only one of them matters for strategic competition. Military spending. America spends more on defense than China. But military power depends on industrial capacity. You can't build ships without shipyards. You can't produce missiles without supply chains. America's military depends increasingly on components made in China or from Chinese-controlled materials. Technology firms. America has Apple, Google, and Microsoft. These are valuable companies, but they design products that are made in China. They depend on supply chains they don't control. In a conflict, that dependency becomes a liability. Financial power. The dollar is the global reserve currency. This provides enormous leverage, but financial power is built on real economic relationships. As more trade flows through China, the dollar's dominance erodes slowly but persistently. America is still powerful, but its power is increasingly hollow. Financial assets without industrial foundations, military spending without manufacturing capacity, technology designs without production capability. China's power is dense. Factories, supply chains, physical infrastructure, trained workers, processed materials, the tangible foundations of economic might. 7. The distraction strategy. While China built its position, America was distracted. The war on terror. From 2001 to 2021, American attention and trillions of dollars flowed to the Middle East. Wars in Afghanistan and Iraq consumed military resources and strategic focus. Meanwhile, China was building. Financial engineering. American elites got rich through financial manipulation, private equity, hedge funds, stock buybacks, mergers and acquisitions. This created paper wealth without productive capacity. Meanwhile, China was building factories. Domestic politics. American political energy went to culture wars, partisan battles, and institutional decay. Infrastructure bills failed for decades. Industrial policy was ideologically unacceptable. Meanwhile, China was building supply chains. Offshoring. American corporations moved production to China to boost quarterly profits. Executives were rewarded for cutting costs. The long-term loss of industrial capability wasn't their problem. Meanwhile, China was learning. Every year of distraction was a year China used to consolidate. Every dollar spent on financial engineering was a dollar not spent on industrial capacity. Every factory closed in Ohio and opened in Guangdong was a step toward the current reality. This wasn't a secret Chinese plan executed through deception. China was quite open about its goals. Made in China 2025 was a published document outlining plans to dominate advanced manufacturing. The Belt and Road Initiative was announced with fanfare. America simply didn't take it seriously. Or took it seriously in rhetoric but not in action. 8. Why it can't be reversed. The strategic positions China has achieved cannot be reversed through tariffs, sanctions, or tough talk. The supply chain problem. Modern manufacturing involves global supply chains with thousands of components from hundreds of suppliers. These relationships took decades to build. They can't be redirected by executive order. Apple can't move iPhone production to America next year. The suppliers don't exist. The workforce doesn't exist. The infrastructure doesn't exist. Even with unlimited money, rebuilding would take 10 to 20 years. The expertise problem. Manufacturing knowledge isn't just in machines, it's in people. Process engineers who know how to run semiconductor fabs, workers who can maintain quality at scale, managers who understand complex supply chains. This expertise exists in China. It would take a generation to develop elsewhere. The ecosystem problem. Industries cluster because clustering creates advantages. When a factory opens, suppliers locate nearby. Specialized services develop. A labor pool forms. The ecosystem makes everyone more efficient. China has these ecosystems. Building them elsewhere means starting from scratch against established competition. The economics don't work. The cost problem. Even if all other problems were solved, Chinese manufacturing is cheaper. Labor costs are lower. Subsidies are higher. Environmental and safety regulations are less burdensome. Products made outside China cost more. Consumers and companies have shown they prefer lower prices. Reshoring means accepting permanently higher costs. The time problem. Whatever America does now, China has a 20-year head start. Every year of effort to catch up, China continues advancing. The gap might narrow in relative terms while widening in absolute terms. 9. What checkmate looks like. Let me describe what China's victory means in practice. In a Taiwan scenario, if China moved on Taiwan, American sanctions would trigger Chinese export restrictions. Suddenly, no rare earth magnets for American weapon systems, no electronics for consumer goods, no batteries for electric vehicles. The disruption would be catastrophic. America would have to choose between backing down or accepting economic chaos that would make the 2008 financial crisis look minor. In the energy transition, the clean energy future runs on Chinese supply chains. Solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, electric vehicles, all dominated by China. America can have clean energy, but only as a customer of Chinese industry. In the developing world, countries that need infrastructure go to China. Countries that need loans go to China. Countries that need technology go to China. American influence in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America erodes year by year as Chinese-built ports and Chinese-funded railways reorient economic relationships. In technology standards, as Chinese technology spreads, Chinese standards spread with it. 5G networks built by Huawei use Chinese specifications. Payment systems built by Chinese companies use Chinese protocols. The digital infrastructure of the 21st century is being built to Chinese designs. This is what checkmate looks like. Not invasion or conquest. Structural dominance that shapes all options. Every move the opponent makes plays into positions already established. 10. What America can still do. Is the situation hopeless? Not entirely, but the options are limited and the costs are high. Manage competition. Accept Chinese dominance in some sectors while competing fiercely in others. Focus resources on areas where America still has advantages. Advanced AI, biotechnology, advanced aerospace. Alliance building. Work with Europe, Japan, South Korea, and others to maintain collective leverage. Alone, America can't match China. Together, the democratic world still has greater resources. Domestic investment. Actually build things. Infrastructure, manufacturing capacity, workforce training, industrial policy that goes beyond press releases. This requires political consensus that doesn't currently exist. Strategic decoupling. In critical sectors like semiconductors, accept the cost of building redundant capacity outside China. This means higher prices and lower efficiency, but reduced vulnerability. Long-term perspective. Recognize that reversing China's advantages will take decades, not years. Sustain focus through multiple administrations. Stop expecting quick wins. None of this is happening at the necessary scale. American politics can't sustain long-term strategies. Industrial policy remains ideologically contested. Alliance relationships are strained. Domestic investment is blocked by partisan gridlock. Conclusion. The new reality. Here's what I want you to understand. The great power competition between America and China isn't a game that's being played, it's a game that was played. Past tense. China won the industrial competition. China won the supply chain competition. China won the infrastructure competition. China won the critical materials competition. The positions are established. The advantages are locked in. The structural realities can't be wished away with tough rhetoric or symbolic tariffs. America remains powerful. The dollar still dominates finance. The military is still unmatched. Soft power still matters. But this power floats on foundations that America doesn't control. The factories are in China. The supply chains run through China. The materials are processed in China. The infrastructure in the developing world was built by China. This is the world now. Not the world that might come to be if China keeps rising. The world that already exists. The question isn't whether America can win the competition with China. That competition is over. The question is whether America can adapt to a world where it's no longer dominant, where it has to share power, where it can't dictate terms. That's a harder question, and it's not clear America has the answer. If this analysis showed you something the mainstream narrative doesn't, hit that subscribe button, because understanding reality is the first step to dealing with it. See you in the comments, and remember, the most dangerous illusions are the ones that feel good, and nothing feels better than believing you're still winning.